Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating explainer. We're going to completely unpack an August 2026 manifesto titled The Miracle Gate, a prophetic declaration for Sabah restoration. Now, what makes this specific document so incredibly compelling is how it seamlessly, and I mean seamlessly, weaves together the dense, legalistic framework of constitutional law with the fiery, passionate language of spiritual prophecy. It's a pretty remarkable text, honestly, because it merges the earthly and the divine to make a really bold political statement. Just listen to how they open this manifesto. From the heights of Mount Kinabalu to the shores of Sandakan, the Spirit of God is stirring. The prophets have spoken. The nations have watched. And now the hour has come. I mean, wow. That sets a deeply powerful tone right out of the gate, doesn't it? It instantly immerses us in this urgent, highly spiritually charged atmosphere that the authors used to frame their entire movement. Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of everything, we're going to follow a clear roadmap today. First, the miracle gate opens. Second, redefining Kadazan Sabahan identity. Third, 60 years of lost safeguards. Fourth, the 4 pillars of breakthrough. And finally, number 5, the final decree. Let's start right at the top with part 1, the miracle gate opens, focusing on Kota Kinabalu's prophetic role. So the authors take a physical, geographic location and completely transform it into a massive spiritual catalyst. They declare that the city of Kota Kinabalu is the miracle gate. And they're super specific here. They argue this isn't some title given by politicians, but an actual decree from heaven. They state that the city was never meant to be a back door or just some convenient passage for outsiders to extract local resources. No, they're saying it was ordained to be a gateway of true authority. Basically, they're framing Kota Kinabalu as the literal starting point for a sweeping, total restoration of Sabah. And they make it very clear that this isn't just a spiritual revival, it's a territorial, economic, and constitutional reclamation driven by an awakened indigenous voice. Moving right along to Section 2, redefining Kadazan Sabahan identity, moving beyond biology. Now, this is where the text takes a really surprising and incredibly inclusive approach. The manifesto actively redefines what it actually means to be a Kadazan Sabahan. They explicitly reject the idea of dividing their people up by race or religion. Instead, the text defines a Kadazan Sabahan as literally every son and daughter born on this soil. So if you were bred in her jungles, cities, or seas, they're saying you belong. They are building an identity based on calling Sabah home, by blood, sweat, and memory, rather than strictly by biological lineage. It's an identity united by birthplace, shared burden, and a shared birthright. Just look at how incredibly wide they're casting this net. They're explicitly bringing together the Kadazan, Murut, Rungus, and Bajau communities, right alongside Chinese, Indians, Malays, and Malinas. They're uniting Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus. They're deliberately bridging the gap between indigenous folks and the settler-born, bringing together urban professionals and rural farmers. You see what they're doing here? The authors are systematically constructing this massive, highly diverse coalition. It's a really powerful narrative of shared multiracial stewardship over the land. But they don't just stop at earthly unity. They elevate this inclusive identity from just, regular political solidarity to what they call a spiritual DNA. The text references these deep indigenous spiritual concepts like Huso Sumanundu Tobitua and the DNA of Kinoingan Mina Monganya. They're essentially arguing that being the first people of the nation isn't about biological elitism. It's entirely about spiritual stewardship. They claim this deep-rooted connection gives them an authority that literally shakes regions. Okay, shifting gears to Section 3, 60 years of lost safeguards, digging into the constitutional grievance. This is where we hit the concrete, historical, and legal complaints driving the sheer urgency of this movement. The authors draw a really sharp, painful contrast between the promises made back in 1963 and the reality today. In 1963, under the Malaysia Agreement, or MA63, and the 20 points plus 2 safeguards, they argue Sabah entered the Federation as an equal partner, complete with guaranteed autonomy. But look at the current status they're describing. They claim they've been reduced to just being one of 13 states, that their immigration powers have been diluted, and that their immense wealth, stuff like oil, timber, and palm, has been relentlessly extracted while they were left with just crumbs. It's a stark portrayal of a 60-year systemic dismantling of their rights. Let's map out how this builds into their timeline. The authors very deliberately link legal history directly with spiritual milestones. First, you have 1963, which is the legal foundation of that equal partnership. Then they highlight 1973, pointing specifically to the Barrio and Tadinamba revivals as spiritual precedents of God moving in Borneo. And finally, this all culminates in 2026 with their prophetic declaration. So they are effectively drawing a straight line from a breached legal contract straight to a divine spiritual intervention meant to fix it.
Because of that unique framing, they don't view the erosion of their constitutional rights as just, say, bad bureaucracy or unfair politics. No, the authors treat this 60-year loss as literal, intense spiritual warfare. The text calls for readers to put on the full armor of Yah to fight against what they refer to as the thief, Nephilim spirits, and the forces of the kingdom of darkness. It's just a fascinating juxtaposition. I mean, you don't usually see modern constitutional complaints being fought with the apocalyptic language of ancient spiritual warfare, right?
Which brings us to Section 4, the 4 pillars of breakthrough. This is their strategy. Now, what's really interesting about this is how they plan to actually achieve this restoration. The framework they derived from their June 2026 prayer school merges standard concepts of intercessory prayer directly with hard, non-negotiable political demands. The entire movement rests on these 4 pillars: determination, direction, specificity, and faith. Let's break down exactly what each of those means in the real world. Pillars 1 and 2 are determination and direction. The authors are determined that Sabah's sovereignty and the original 20 points plus 2 are living, breathing constitutional guarantees, not just historical footnotes that can be ignored. But their direction is equally crucial here. Actually, scratch that. It's absolutely vital to understand this point. The text explicitly states they do not seek separation from Malaysia. They are not asking to leave. Instead, they're demanding a return to the original 1963 intent, a true federation of 3 equal regions, Malaya, Sabah, and Sarawak. They just want an end to what they pretty bluntly call a master-servant relationship. All right, then we hit Pillar 3, specificity. And the magic number here is 40%. The authors state that they have to command the hands of government with highly specific demands. So they are demanding a 40% net revenue from oil and gas extracted from Sabah, and they make it crystal clear this is not a request for charity, and it certainly isn't driven by greed. They frame this 40% as a constitutional entitlement that is absolutely vital for their very survival, literally, to fund their schools, their hospitals, and their roads. The final pillar is faith. They anchor their absolute belief that this movement will succeed by looking backward to that 1973 burial revival we mentioned earlier. For the authors, that historical event is undeniable proof that when the spirit moves in Borneo, systems actually change and the land is healed. They're operating entirely on the faith that Kinonggengan Minamangun Ya is visiting Sabah again right now, and not just for a church revival, but for complete national restoration. To make all this happen, they declare a united stand against division. They heavily criticize the importation of peninsula politics, specifically calling out PMPIS by name. They argue that these outside political forces have been weaponized to intentionally fracture their local communities, their civil services, and even their churches and mosques. Basically, the manifesto argues that while the people of Sabah were busy arguing over imported political labels, their timber was being logged and their oil was being pumped. So relying on this pillar of faith means they have to completely reject outside political division. Finally, we reach Section 5, the final decree. This is the ultimatum. This is the climax of the document. Everything we've talked about, all the spiritual fervor and legal arguments, culminates right here in a firm 6-point decree. First, they declare MA 63 and the 20 points as unbreachable foundational covenants. Second, those 20 points are non-negotiable safeguards. Third, that 40% net revenue is an absolute right, and importantly, they threaten to pursue it through both earthly lawful means and spiritual means, like petitioning the court of heaven. Fourth, Sabah is a sovereign region of equals. Fifth, they call for one united people willing to shed sweat and sacrifice. And finally, number 6, they state the Miracle Gate is officially open for restoration. The whole document wraps up on this incredibly intense call to action. Arise, Kadazan Sabans. The gate is open. The 60 years are ending. We choose by heaven and by earth to stand. You can really feel the immense rhetorical weight they are aiming for here. They aren't just filing a standard political grievance. They are drawing a hard line in the sand, invoking both earthly and heavenly authority to demand what they believe is rightfully theirs. So, what does this all mean for the road ahead? It leaves us with a pretty massive question to ponder. Will this prophetic declaration, with its entirely unique blend of constitutional demands and intense spiritual warfare, actually reshape the future of the Malaysian Federation? It is a truly fascinating case study in how deeply held spiritual beliefs can mobilize a population around strict legal and economic rights. And it perfectly highlights why understanding these hybrid movements is so absolutely crucial today. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking those big questions, and we'll catch you next time.